Hey, good people. Welcome to another podcast episode of the Melanated Mental Health Awareness Podcast. I am so super duper excited because I get to be on with another fellow mental health practitioner. So I'm super duper excited. My name is DeShara Doub. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vision of Promise LLC.
And I am Adrienne Marshall. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Currently working for Chris 180, where I work with the New Generations program with children dealing with early childhood trauma.
So, myself and Miss Adrienne are mental health practitioners that deal specifically around youth, around children and families. And so, we thought it would be very important to have a conversation because our world just turned upside down in the middle
Yes.
of March. And so, we have a lot of great concern of how, of course, how this impacts our communities for sure, but specifically how it impacts youth and how to deal with one what has been going on, but then also how to prepare for the weeks and months to come. So I want to kind of start back at the beginning, Adrienne, and we kind of talked a little bit prepping for this podcast, and we were discussing how around March the 12th or so is when physical school began to shift. So I wanted to kind of share my experience a little bit, and then Adrienne has a really interesting take that she'll be sharing as well. But I think one of the things that's really interesting is around physical school and receiving mental health services. So through my lens, I actually am full time in a school setting as my primary setting. And so I thought it was really interesting because actually within my demographic, this was the very first year that they had full-time mental health practitioners
Right.
in the school system. And so we were not given any more notice than the general public in terms of, okay, COVID is ramping up a little quicker than we anticipated. Now it's
Mhm.
time for us to start looking at not having physical school. And so I know, at least for me, one of my greatest challenges was figuring out immediately, how do I touch the kids that I have one on my regular caseload, and then the kids that have consents, or the kids that I have had engagements with throughout the school year. How do I make sure that they get what they need before our physical school ended? And I know that that was a great challenge, but I know you have a completely different take, and I would love for the audience to hear that as well.
Well, for my take, it's a little bit different because you had an opportunity to get that firsthand account of, when everything sort of started to transition with kids, being in school, and all of a sudden this pandemic, being up, and everybody's being in an uproar, and then all of a sudden it's like, kids are being sent home. And I think from there was a question about whether, there were all these different time limits, whether or not they were going to be home for a week, whether or not they were going to be home for just a month, that they were going back in April. And from the parental perspective as well, we would get all of these emails that would come every month, and that would say, hey, we're going to be out to the 31st of March. Then it would go, hey, we're going to be out to the 30th of April. And
Mm-hmm.
so from my perspective, though, on the job end, working in community mental health, a lot of times when I would see kids, we would go in either to the school or to the home. It just kind of depends on what type of services we were rendering at that time. If it was individual one-on-one child therapy, we would, find time to go into the school. And then if we were doing family, of course, we would go into the home. Well, of course, when you guys shut down, when the school shut down, ordinarily, right? Like, say, for instance, during the summertime, when those schools are closed, we can go into the home. But with the pandemic, we couldn't go into the home or the school or the home. So we had to transition. Not only were they transitioning with school, but they were transitioning with their services. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we had to move forward into virtual therapy services, which was a huge leap in and of itself, because one thing that's key in doing therapy with children is that play therapy element, that that hands-on, whether you're using games, whether you're using, handheld manipulatives, anything that can kind of, help to build rapport, to help them to process their thoughts and their feelings in session. So that's been a very different thing, and it has had its challenges. So I won't lie about that. But one of the biggest challenges with it was, or is, I should say, being sure that, the kids can really get the full help that they need while at home, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because there's also the issue of confidentiality. If you got your little brother or cousins or something running around, or, mom and dad is in and out, then, it can be challenging, definitely.
For sure. And it's so interesting that you just mentioned that, because I think that was one of the biggest areas of concern for me. And when I talked to my colleagues of how we were going to navigate this new virtual space of doing, providing services, is the privacy part.
Hmm.
And that was one of the things I definitely wanted to like take an opportunity to really like lean in on briefly, is the fact that seeking these types of services is a sacred space for a lot of people. This is the
Right.
only time that they're able to really speak their mind. They're able to be vulnerable,
Hmm.
and when you are unable to have that space designated, so a lot of people feel safe not being in the space that they're most comfortable with, or where everybody is, like going to school or going into an office. But when you have to go into the space in at home, where you're
Hmm.
not sure who's eavesdropping, and you're not
Right.
sure if you could have private space. And especially with COVID, everybody for the most part was at home. I think that, there were a lot of people that was at a place of privilege that,
Hmm.
was able to stay home, because the reality is everybody wasn't able to. People still had to go to work a lot of times, and or
Right.
people were laid off and things like that. So it's like, when you have a house full of people, and then, everybody is dealing with their own level of stress of, transitions with work, or school, or whatever. A lot of times you can't really get the services and be able to pay attention and really engage in the way that you once did, because it's already a high level of stress in the environment you're in. And then also that privacy part. But one of the things that one of my colleagues mentioned that I think about a lot, but I never want to be a person to always like put this at the forefront.
Hmm.
But a lot of times people aren't safe at home. You know,
Right.
home is
Right.
not home is not a safe place for a lot of people. So as much as people like you and I, who provide services, and we're giving them like tips of how to do virtual
Right.
sessions, we're like, hey, make sure you have your headphones on, make sure you're in a quiet place.
Hmm.
That's like a place of privilege, but when
Right.
you don't have that, or when you don't have the technology or the Wi-Fi to support those type of services, it's like, how do you navigate that?
Right. And you have to be so perceptive, because, when you enter those virtual sessions, and, you're asking questions like you just mentioned, like be sure you have your headphones on, and all these sorts of things, we are sometimes in danger when, at the same time, we're trying to build rapport, right? With
Mhm.
appearing sort of tone deaf, because, or out of touch, I should say, because we're assuming that they have these, these setups and these positive environments and things like that. And it's like, even though we know that that's not the case for everybody, when we get on, and we're doing this work, there are so many different things that we have to keep into consideration. And I know it's an overused example, but it's really like an onion. Like, there's so many layers.
Mhm.
And, at the point, the truth of it is that if you have a safe home, that's a privilege, because
Mhm.
not everybody does. And not even so much just, overtly, say, in households that might be overtly abusive, but in some households where there are strained situations, where a child might need to talk about something, but maybe for, whatever reason, they're just not comfortable with talking about it in that space, in that place at that time. And so that's something that, having them do that one-on-one time, or allowing them to be able to come into a private office, obviously there's a difference there. And so we also have to be mindful of it, like you said, when we're giving out these tips about what we think they should do at home after therapy is done, like how to connect with family and things like that. And that's another thing. Not all families are cohesive, um, so that's something that we as practitioners and clinicians, we have to always keep into consideration.
For sure. And it's interesting because we're in the midst of summer break, and
Mhm.
I know that everybody is excited to have their break because this has been a whirlwind of a 2020.
Yes, it
Um
has.
but it's interesting because I'm looking at my calendar and I'm like, wow, we got like one more full week and then we're in July, and then
Yes.
really stuff is going to start ramping up. And so although people are not ready, including myself,
Right.
to go back
Mhm.
into regular programming in terms of the school year. But I guess I'm wondering if we could give some advice or tips to families, particularly those who maybe saw that their kiddo or their family member had a difficult time with the transition from physical school to like the non-traditional learning or the virtual learning. And now there is still so much uncertainty about how the school year is going to look. If we're going to go back to school with maybe block scheduling, or so
Right.
like how this social distancing will work, or if we're going to continue with virtual school for the rest of the school year. I guess what would be like some tips that you would give to a family of how their kiddo can continue to engage in mental health services?
There are still virtual services available. I know that I can't speak for any other state or city, but I know here in the Atlanta area, Chris 180 is a huge agency. And so, they are, big in working with kids and that sort of thing. And so, there are services out there. You just have to do your research about who offers virtual therapy services and things like that. And there still may be even private practices, if that's affordable for you, where they offer private virtual sessions. I know one of my supervisors right now, in that lives in South Georgia, he is back into the office, offering services. Of course, they're taking temperatures, they're wearing masks, and they're doing all the distancing that they can. Um, but there are some places who are starting to open up, slowly as well. And I think too, the prerequisite to mental health services for kids, is like what I always tell people, is recognizing that children are people. They're human beings. They're people. They're going to have good days, they're going to have bad days. There's this running joke, right, about kids, quote unquote, like hating school and not wanting, school's a drag, and because of the work and the homework and the teachers and the this and the that. But the reality is there were a lot of kids who didn't realize that they really would miss it once it was closed, and once it was done. They're missing their social interactions, they're missing their friends. They might be missing that support system from maybe a teacher or all of their teachers, who encourage them, maybe in a way that maybe some people at home did not or have not. So there's this whole other support system, within schools that kids are missing, and they might not be able to verbally express outright that, hey, I miss school. And it might be kind of crazy even for them to even hear themselves say that. And so I think that that's the first thing to take into consideration, and to just kind of examine their levels of motivation at home. Do they need to get outside? Do they need some one-on-one time? Do they need access to other resources and activities out in the community? And adding those into their regimen for also mental health services if mental health services are needed.
For sure. And, I would even add as well that families, especially if you are the custodial parent, if you are the legal parent or guardian, I will even encourage them to check in with their kiddos, therapist,
Hmm.
counselor, mental health provider. Check in with them because you are exactly right. A lot of states are reopening slowly, and everybody is kind of reopening differently in terms of like what are the expectations. I know for myself, I've been to a couple of doctor's appointments since
Hmm.
things are slowly opening back up, and you're absolutely right. They're having like one person per, like one at a time in buildings, especially if they're, in more close proximity with like the provider, wearing masks, making sure they're not touching the surfaces and things of that nature. So I know kids have a difficult time with that, because I can remember being a kid and not having any concept that I couldn't hug people or I couldn't
Hmm.
share things with people, because that's just what we do, right? So I'll tell custodial parents and guardians to definitely feel like that you can check in
Hmm.
with your child's provider and ask them, what are some things that I can do to make sure that my kiddo is comfortable continuing to get services. Because I think one of the things that a lot of people, and you said it exactly right, kids are still people too. And although we see kids as being very resilient and they have the
Hmm.
ability to like bounce out of situations probably quicker than most, um,
Yeah.
but I think as well, there is so many things going on right now. And
Hmm.
so, although typically kiddos, when they get services in school, yeah, it can be centered on, home, but a lot of times it's really focused on what's going on at school, like their academics,
Right.
their behavior, their interactions with their peers, and things like that. And so I would definitely encourage families to definitely like have, we call it in our world, the interdisciplinary treatment team. They talk
Right.
about,
Hmm.
having everybody that's involved with that child's life to all
Right.
meet together to figure out what are the next best steps. But I'll also even go as far as to also say, when you were mentioning about the relationships that kids have with like their teachers and things like that,
Hmm.
when people find out when school is reopening, I would even encourage people to start reaching out to your kiddo's teacher. Like, go ahead and email them, say, hey, I just want to make sure that, I'm doing what I can to support my student. And I will even say, don't just think this is for little kids. Also think of this for high school children too, because I think that a lot of times, when people think that their kid is old enough to do things for themselves, you never know what kind of stress and even secondary trauma with everything that's been going on that
Hmm.
your child is experiencing. And it maybe at one point in time they could be very vocal and be like, oh, I'll just do it myself, or
Right.
whatever. But sometimes they do absolutely need that support. So I would definitely encourage, just reaching out. And also, like you mentioned, provide space at home. People are starting to reopen back up. You can, go take a ride, go take a walk around the neighborhood, and just have a one-on-one conversation
Right.
with your kiddo and ask them, how are you doing? Because I think one of the things that a lot of people don't think about as well is most of these kids have their own technology. Like, they have their own
Right.
phone, their own tablet, they have social media a lot of times. And so the same things that we're seeing as adults,
Right.
they're
Right.
seeing as kids. And so, and they a lot of times don't have the ability to process it like us,
Hmm.
where, we're able to be like, okay, I need to tune this out because it's getting too much. A lot
Uh-huh.
of times kids don't have that, that barometer of like, okay, maybe this is like too much.
It's too
So I
much.
would definitely say, go ahead and have that conversation with your kiddo and say, hey, I know you saw what's going on. Is
Hmm.
there anything I can help? Is there anything you want to do? Because I think that that can also be absolutely a way of self-care and a way of keeping up with mental health and wellness, of like kind of integrating those things too.
Definitely. And, use this as an opportunity to talk about those emotions that we look at as being unpopular or very vulnerable. Like, for instance, the emotions of anger and fear. And like with fear, it's like as a child, right, you're basically living a life until, like, let's say the age of 18 or 21, just depending on what your circumstances are like, where you literally have no control really over anything. You're taught, you know, within a system of like having no control. At home the rules are made for you, at school the rules are made for you, but even within that, it's like, like, say for instance, you're in a classroom, a child is in a classroom, and then they have to follow the rules of that teacher, and they are told that they're in control of their actions then. But when they get outside in the world, they're really in control of nothing. They're not in control of how mom or dad are going to come home and feel that day. They're not in control of whether mom and dad are going to get sick when they're out and about, at their different jobs. They're not in control of all those different things that could possibly happen. And so I think that it's good to try to give kids a sense of control over those things that they do have domain over. Keeping themselves clean, keeping their areas clean, making sure that they're engaging in positive things, teaching them how to choose, what's good for them to take in internally versus what's not. I think that we need to consider those things, and then consider, maybe what are some things that might make them angry. Though sometimes, anger is one of those emotions. I like to use the example of a lighthouse. Anger is one of those emotions. It sends out a light, and it's looking for ships. It's looking for those things that are coming in. So a lot of people don't realize that you can get embarrassed, right? Or you can feel irritation, or you can feel frustration. You can have all these thoughts and feelings that lead to the emotion of fear. And so many kids, they don't know what's coming out of all of this. You've got all these adults talking in their household, in their communities, in the news media, and it's like trying to for a small mind, it's trying to put pieces together. And so, that can be a lot. So I think talking about those emotions that go along with big things like the pandemic, or the racial injustice, and helping them to identify those emotions that might not be what we deem as so positive, and also talking to them about the things that they can control in their lives, things that they could bring them some pride, bring them purpose, and thus bring them some joy, and help to motivate them when school does start back up, or they're going back into the world, because going back to school might bring some fear too.
Oh, for sure. And it's so funny because I almost feel like this is a good segue
Mm-hmm.
of talking about our current climate.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really engaging in what it looks like to enter back into school, and really, just try to recalibrate, re-strategize, regroup
Mm-hmm.
around how COVID has just kind of shifted our world. But then our world kind of shifted in a whole nother unique way. And
Right.
I'll say specifically, because this is the Melanated Mental Health Awareness Podcast,
Right.
we're talking about specifically our people, our melanated people, with the racial injustice, the racial pandemic
Mm-hmm.
that's going on. And it's interesting because, we are very much in a technological age. And so as much as I want to plug out a lot of times, or tune out to social media and news and things like that, every once in a while I'll get a little snippet of something from
Mm-hmm.
somewhere.
Right.
And I've noticed a lot of parents and a lot of adults, I'll use that word exclusively. Adults have had children out there and have had young people out there with them. And I think it's so interesting. um I'm definitely a person that believes in history, that
Mm-hmm.
I've been so grateful in my life to have had my family and, mentors and things like that that have exposed me to different areas of the country, and different things that have happened over the course of my lifetime and prior to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder as well, in knowing that all of us, seasoned, saints, I call them, our elderly, our protected population, as well as anyone else that has eyes and ears and feelings, have their thoughts around what's going on right now. And I kind of wanted to ask you and kind of open up the conversation around, how do parents, adults, family members prepare the younger people around, one, explaining around what's going on right now, and two, how can they protect themselves, maybe engage if the family so chooses. I don't know if you had any particular feedback or any tips that you could give.
Um, well, definitely, with our people, engaging, I think that you do have to consider, um, you know, safety measures, while also it's really a juggling act almost. It's like you want to educate, you want to inform, right, without overwhelming and without necessarily scaring. A little bit of fear is good sometimes, depending on what's happening, because that's part of how we survive. But you want to engage them, you want them to be engaged, you want them to be knowledgeable about what's happening with their people and within their community. But at the same time, it's a survivalist instinct. You want to be safe. And I think that, number one, education starts at home, right? And I think, educating your kids about, hey, has really been an ongoing process. Like right now, we are having an upheaval, but we've had so many upheavals ever since our people were kidnapped and brought over to this country.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of upheavals, and part of that is educating them. Maybe instead of pulling up, say for instance, the news on a television or even on social media, going through articles with them, teaching them the importance of the work that our people have done, the history, the things that we've accomplished, despite the challenges and despite the dangers and despite everything that we have faced. And even if it gets to the point where you decide, hey, you want to show them being in the middle of things, I think for parents, of course, it is that responsibility rests on us to make sure that we are putting our children in safe situations. So like for instance, in the little area where I'm currently living right now, there was a small and peaceful protest in the little downtown area. Very peaceful. There was a rally. A lot of the town officials and everybody came. And I felt like as a parent, that was a safe place to take my 12-year-old, for her to kind of see what that process is like, how people protest. We started out kind of with something fun. We went and bought our paper and our markers to make signs, and use it as an educational tool. And then when you do that too, just because we live in a world that's unpredictable, you kind of, especially now, we're so hyper vigilant, right? Because I know we've talked about vicarious trauma and that sort of thing, kind of
Mm-hmm.
keeping your head on a swivel. And so just looking out, if you do want to expose your kids about any potential dangerous situations that might come up. So once they're able to once they've been exposed, once they've seen it, once you've talked to them, then coming back to a safe place and debriefing and saying, okay, what did you think about that process? How was that? That gives you a little taste of, what our people, have had to do over the years in order to gain freedom. And not only just that, take them to the voting precincts with you. That's a really big place, a really big thing that you can do, with your kids. And so there's so many different ways to show them, educate them, engage them, while also being responsible and being careful.
You know what? I can't agree with you more. And it's such it's such an interesting time because, as I was reflecting on that, I was thinking about there's been different points in our history where parents and families have had to have these discussions with their kids, and immediately I thought about when the bus boycotts in Montgomery first began and
Mhm.
what caused that. And I can't imagine what the conversations were as unfortunately the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed and 4 little
Right.
girls died. How did those parents explain to those other kids in that church that their friends were no longer with us, like those type of pieces? And that was, that was just so long prior to 2020, and yet we're still even having these conversations and trying to process how to navigate this even now. And it's such an interesting time. But one thing I would even add to what you said is definitely ask your kids around what they would like to do. Like if
Mhm.
they feel like, if you see that they have some type of passion or interest in social justice reform, maybe they're saying, well, I'm sad because you know this lady or this guy died, what can I do? If it seems like that they're having some type of yearning passion to give back to the community, I would encourage families to see what are some ways within your local community that you can even give back. So a lot of times maybe people don't feel comfortable going out to demonstrations because
Right.
of the crowd or the uncertainty, like you said, keeping your head on a swivel. We're still in a global health pandemic, so
Right.
there's a lot of uncertainty around that. But there's so many local agencies that's still in need of things, everything from soup kitchens to
Mhm.
clothes closets, community agencies that, have people who are less fortunate, homeless, impoverished. And so I think that there are ways that even parents can engage their kids that are still political,
Right.
still fully engaged in the process, but can also be in the way in which their kids shine best. So whatever your child's interest is, if they want to do their own podcast and speak up about what they're feeling, if they are writers, if they're, singers or rappers, if they're, people who maybe you have a quiet child and they maybe want to put some gift baskets together to go out and give, demonstrators, if it's bottled water or if it's snacks
Mhm.
or whatever. I think that this is such a time where children can also lead, children can also be engaged,
Right.
um and then the other things I thought that is so awesome that they're doing now is a lot of these museums, although they're slowly opening back up, have virtual ways that you can visit. So
Mhm.
like, for example, I'm going to highlight the Museum of African American History, also known as what I call it, the Black Smithsonian in DC. It's my favorite
Yes.
museum. I've been 3 times. I went
Oh
twice
wow.
in
Okay.
I went
Yeah.
twice in one year because
Oh
it's just an experience. It's an
yeah. I'm sure.
experience to be
Mhm.
there. But they actually have a virtual museum visit now.
Okay.
So I think that could even be an opportunity where parents can engage their kids through technology and maybe have a time where you sit down and visit the museum together. And if you as a parent are maybe unsure about like what these different exhibits are or who is this person or whatever, you all can learn together. Or if you are the parent that has a little more knowledge on history and things like that, you can
Mhm.
explain to your kid like, hey, this bus came from, Montgomery, Alabama. They had a boycott, kind of like what's going on now, where
Yeah.
people are deciding to not patron certain businesses. And, I think that can just be a very unique opportunity because one of the things kind of making this a full circle opportunity is even in educational settings, a lot of people are calling for having these robust and engaging conversations even in the classroom. Like, how do we engage Black history? How do we engage with our current climate? How do we intersect that in the classroom to talk to children about, ways in which they can become better leaders, better civilians, give back civically to their communities and things like that. So I would definitely encourage parents as well as, if there is a desire to give back, and
Right.
maybe going into your communities isn't as safe right now. And I
Mhm.
definitely want to lift that up because, every city is not having violence.
Right.
A lot of the demonstrations are absolutely peaceful, but I also want to recognize that, we're in a health pandemic too, and a
Right.
lot of people could feel certain ways. I would say definitely find the opportunity to engage in what your child's interest is,
Mhm.
and let that intersect with social change. I think that will be so, so awesome.
Right. And using it as an opportunity to, because here's the thing. When February comes around, right, and we have Black History Month, we usually stay on the same people. And it's, we usually stay kind of on the same things. We don't really branch out into people that we, don't know much about. And so I think it's good to start to build that foundation to teach kids that, hey, like you said, DeShara, that there are many ways that you can commit and that you can engage in the process. Some people are, provide nourishment. Some people, feed the protesters, or they feed those people who are going through, tough times. Some people are philanthropists, they're financiers. They provide funds. Some people are attorneys. They can offer, legal help. Some of us are therapists. We can help people to process their feelings through it. Some people are artists. We talk about art imitating life. They make these pieces that really speak to us in a real way, either through visual art, through the entertainment business, or through um, through music. There are people who make statements even with fashion. We have to think outside the box. And I
Mhm.
think that when it comes to our history, it needs to be more about, okay, let's do some research on somebody who did something in an area maybe that we don't think much about. When they were having the boycott, and the march on Selma, who were the people, who cooked for those folks,
Mhm.
who nourished them, who fed them, who were the people who provided, money, who were the people who provided legal aid, who were the people who provided spiritual guidance, who were the people who were mentors, who were the people who were educators, who were the artists. We don't talk about, people enough, like, say, for instance, Nina Simone. I love
That's
Nina
right.
Simone. And I mean, she was so, she was, I think to call her an activist is like an understatement. I mean, she
Mhm.
was she was she was big, in the movement. And reading up on somebody like her, even though she's a more so well-known musical artist, about, how she was received when she wrote certain musical pieces, and that sort of thing. And just educating about all those different things. Let's not put it in a box. And
Yeah.
also, and I'm gonna, just kind of tell the truth and shame the devil here, but we've got to stop thinking about heroes in the movement being the face, or the speakers, or
Mhm. Mhm.
heroes come in all different roles. There are some people who were heroes, who aided our more well-known leaders, that and we've probably never heard their names.
Absolutely.
And so that's something, that we've got to think about, and thinking outside the box, and engaging our kids, and letting them know that there are many ways to get involved in the process, that there are many ways, many things that we need to be educated on, that we need to learn about, in order to help them to see that this is, this there's a place for everybody within
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I had one more suggestion, and I know that, we're going to wrap up our time. But June 10th is coming up, and you mentioned just not celebrating just that Black History Month. And I can't agree with you more. I love the campaign where it says, Black History 365. Like, I
Yes.
live by that, and I encourage other people to live by that, particularly with your children,
Hmm.
because there is something about when you celebrate the pride of your culture. A lot of our Black kids do not have the opportunity to celebrate the pride of their culture, because we're always in this place of, um, uncertainty, and we're just trying to make it through the world, and the financial and educational, we're just always just
Mhm.
trying to make it, we're trying to get to one place to another. But I think that it is also very healthy to pause and celebrate your culture in a really unique way. So again, Juneteenth is actually on June the 19th, and I want to put that on everybody's brain.
Mhm.
Make sure that you take an opportunity to celebrate the culture. And what does that look like? That could look like anything from reading a book by a Black author, that could be watching a movie that has a Black cast, celebrating some type of cultural anything, with music, with art, with food.
Mhm.
Supporting a Black business in your community, taking that opportunity. If you're not already supporting a Black business, make it your priority that day, that if you're going out to eat, go to a Black restaurant. If you need to get some type of clothing or go shopping, patronize a Black business. I think that that's one way to absolutely engage also in the process of social action and liberation with your children, and starting to see, let's see some people that look like them that also has businesses, and maybe that can even encourage an entrepreneurial spirit
Right.
also with your children, for sure. But I know our time has wrapped up. Adrian, let everybody know where they can follow you and find you.
You can follow me. You can like my page on Facebook, Adrian Marshall MFT. You can follow me. I have the same username on IG, Instagram at Adrian Marshall MFT. And so you can definitely find me in those places. Like I said, I am currently practicing in the Atlanta, Georgia area, marriage and family therapist. So I just kind of deal with everything from families, individuals, definitely couples. I love, helping couples and families to kind of build their foundations and improve their level of communication with one another. So definitely look out for me on Facebook and Instagram.
All righty. Well, you can also follow me, DeShara C. Doub, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and YouTube. And then I also have a Black-owned business that you should absolutely patronize and support, called
Yes.
Vision of Promise LLC. And that business is on Facebook, on Instagram, and also on YouTube. So I'll definitely encourage you all to follow us. I know for me, and Adrian could speak on her behalf, but one of the things that I think is very important around building community is, being resourceful. So I'm absolutely a person, if I have a resource, I share it with the community through social media. It
Definitely.
doesn't always have to be something that you have to formally come into, somebody's office or pay for and things like that. There's always ways that we can just help each other that's very quick
Hmm.
and that is accessible. So that's something I'm committed to in terms of giving back to the community, is just giving whatever resources and sharing any information that I can, particularly with like a podcast such as this.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you all so much for tuning in to the Melanated Mental Health Awareness Podcast. We are so appreciative of you. Again, follow Black with No Chaser on their social medias, as well
Yes.
as the Melanated Mental Health Awareness Podcast on all your podcasting platforms. Make sure you subscribe and share. So thank you all so much. You say Black and beautiful.
All right. Thank you.